This is the public interest. I am Annette Ferguson. In studio with me this morning is Brigadier David Granger, leader of the People's National Congress Reform and leader of the opposition. This morning we will be discussing road fatalities in Guyana. Mr. Granger, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Welcome to the public interest once again.
Thank you.
Mr. Granger, so far for 2013, we have recognized that Guyana has lost in excess of 100 persons on our roads today. Do you mind sharing your sentiments on the road fatalities here in Guyana?
Well, certainly, Annette. I think we've lost 100 too many people. I don't think we need to lose lives at all. It is a failure of government, it's a failure of law enforcement, it's a failure of road safety that we should lose so many lives. Particularly the police, I think, should be alarmed because a former commissioner died on the roads last year, Mr. Henry Green, and this year an assistant commissioner died, as well as a traffic policeman died. And I think we were all shocked as Guyanese to learn that on Christmas Eve Day, somebody who occupies one of the safest jobs in the entire country, the chief librarian, died in a traffic accident. So when you speak of 100 persons, I would like to see the year when nobody dies on the roads. But more work could be done by the government, by the Ministry of Home Affairs, and by the police force to make our roads safer. Right now, I think they're very unsafe. In fact, I would, from the statistics, I believe Guyana has got the worst fatality record in the English-speaking Caribbean. There's no other English-speaking Caribbean country, Trinidad, Barbados, Jamaica, Belize, Bahamas, which has as bad a record as Guyana. So 100 deaths, 100 too many.
Okay, sir, well said. But do you think that much emphasis has been placed by the relevant authorities to address this scourge or this growing problem that we currently face as Guyanese?
On paper, yes. They make plans. The police always come up with some Operation Safeway or Operation Restore Order or something like that. But they charge hundreds of people for minor offenses, jaywalking or jumping over major roads. But as far as fatalities are concerned, I think the police do not get to the heart of the problem. Many of the fatalities take place in the country roads. Places like Eccles, MacDoom, Bagotstown, I call that Death Alley. And there's some areas in the countryside like Ruby on the East Bank, Essequibo, West Coast, Babis, there's some areas, Linden Highway, there's some areas. So I think with a little bit of careful analysis, the police could see where the danger spots are. And rather than rushing around chasing people for, with tinted windscreens and all that, they should deal with the situations and circumstances which cause death. I do not think enough is being done. This is a problem that has been with us for over a decade, maybe 2 decades. And the police force is not putting emphasis in the right direction, in the what I call the really trouble spots. You can go to the car parks and see them milling around, but a lot of the problems start there. You see drivers drinking, and the same drivers who are drinking 2 or 3 Guinness waiting for the bus to fill, well, you see them down Homestretch Avenue or going to the countryside, and next thing you know, there's a smash up. So there are lots of problems, and I do not think that despite the operations, despite the schemes and the plans and the programs, the police are really effectively enforcing traffic safety and traffic discipline rules.
Okay, sir. But as leader of the opposition, what measures you think, or what would be your recommendations to the authorities to more or less to ensure that this problem, this growing problem, is alleviated to some extent? Do you have any suggestions that you would want to share with the government?
Well, we've taken the most extreme measure, that is to ask for the revocation of the appointment of the Minister of Home Affairs. I think, we've lost confidence in him, and I think his presence in the ministry is a big part of the problem. But apart from that, we need to ensure that, for one, there is better enforcement of the law. And there are lots of laws in the books. I don't think we need to have more laws. Laws against drink driving, laws against use of mobile phones, laws against speeding. These are not effectively enforced. And I think this, as a start, there must be better enforcement. Secondly, we must enforce safety of vehicles. That is, it is no point importing defective tires or defective vehicles, because a defective vehicle is a defective vehicle. And we need to ensure that vehicles are modern, that they are safe, and they have all of the features, safety belts and everything else that is needed for a safe vehicle. Thirdly, we need to look at what we call post-crash response. That is, when somebody gets in an accident, there must be some mechanism for removing that person from the scene of the accident, because I believe sometimes people bleed to death because there are no ambulances, and I've seen people put into the backs of police wagons, and that is not the best thing. Once a person is involved in an accident, because I've seen this myself on the East Bank, Essequibo, in fact, I got on the scene before the police, before the ambulances. You must have a national ambulance service that comes on the scene promptly, takes the injured, the victims, and there are persons who are trained in emergency care, in first response, and they take them to the hospital, the closest hospital. So there are lots of measures that can be put in place. I don't see any of that happening now.
Okay, I know you would have pointed out some of the major measures that can be put in place, and some of the problems that would normally cause these major accidents on our streets. However, what about the importation of tires? We know for the fact that a lot of second-hand tires are coming into our country. Is this right?
Well, as I said, the tires are a big problem. Number one, they tend to become unserviceable much more quickly, and they create an environmental hazard because they have to be disposed of. Mm-hmm. But many of them are unsafe, and sometimes along the highway you see bits and pieces of tires which have simply broken off. Mm-hmm. I think that apart from road safety, there must be vehicle safety. And I agree with you that tires are part of vehicle safety, that we should not use any accessories, including tires, which are not safe. And there must be an inspectorate which ensures that particularly passengers are not put in vehicles where the brakes or the tires are defective or likely to become defective. You're quite right. And this is something we will obviously have to address in the National Assembly, because it is out of hand. For Guyana to be having 28 deaths per 100,000, which is double that of many of the Caribbean countries, I think indicates it is at the stage of a crisis, at the stage of a catastrophe.
I know the Guyana National Bureau of Standards, they are responsible for inspecting of used items or any items coming into our country. Mm-hmm. But what we would have seen from time gone by is that apparently this particular organization is not doing what they're
No, I don't agree with you. They are working hard, but the enforcement, they're not equipped to enforce the law throughout the country. You have to rely on agencies such as the Guyana Police Force, which still has responsibility for what they call fitness, roadworthiness. Mm-hmm. So I think the Guyana Bureau of Standards could lay down the standards and maybe could conduct inspections. But when you're talking about enforcing, when you're talking about arresting and bringing people before the courts and charging them and that type of thing, I think you need a stronger arm like the police force. So I think the responsibility should be split. The Bureau of Standards is working very hard, and I'm quite sure that in every respect they can tell you what the standards are, but the enforcement authority had better be the police, because it's too widespread, and there's no point creating a new enforcement authority. I think the police could be given that task. What I'm not satisfied with is that the actual inspection for roadworthiness that is done by the police, perhaps that could be given to a civilian authority, because I would like to see more policemen on the street, in uniform, on the beat, enforcing the law. Something like inspection of vehicles, maybe we can give an authority, whether or not they are aligned to the police force. I mean, anybody can, any trained mechanic can inspect a vehicle if the lights are working, the brakes are working, and that sort of thing. And this is a recommendation. I say this confidently because it's a recommendation which was made by the Discipline Forces Commission 10 years ago in 2003, that a lot of functions performed by trained policemen could be performed by other employees and free those policemen to do enforcement work on the street. Right now, I do not feel that there are enough policemen on the street, and that is one of the problems. Police can only work a certain number of hours a day. They come to work at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning and they go home at 4 or 5 o'clock. But most of the accidents take place at night, in my view, or after normal working hours. So I would like to see a lot more policemen on motorbikes, in patrol cars, on the highways, the Linden-Soosdijk Highway, the Corentyne Highway, the West Bank, the West Coast Berbice Highway, Escribo Highway, and these are where the accidents take place. I would like to see a lot more enforcement. Sometimes you can drive for miles without seeing a policeman. And speeding minibus, well, I don't want to blame the minibus drivers alone, but sometimes you have young men, partying, drinking too much on a weekend, and they are sometimes the ones who get into trouble. But if they felt that a policeman is going to be on the scene, a policeman is going to be round that bend, they are likely to be more careful. Right now, they know policemen are too few and far between, particularly in the traffic department.
Okay, sir. I know for a fact that sometime in October, the Guyana National Road Safety Council, they more or less would have compiled a strategy, a 7-year strategy from 2013 to 2020. More or less, I think this strategy was more or less developed based on UN recommendation to deal with this whole road fatality, right? And what the Minister of Home Affairs, Clement Lohi, would have said when that strategy was handed to him by the acting chairman, that is Norman McLean. He said that he would ensure that policemen are placed on the road at every street corner on a daily basis.
Mr. Roy said that.
Yeah, Mr. Roy did say that, right? But I mean, you're a driver, I'm a driver too. When we drive the streets in Georgetown, little, or in some cases, you don't see police at all.
I think that is the problem. I think we've had experience with this administration that they say and do many things to comply with international conventions or sometimes international pressure, but they do not have the capability or perhaps the interest to fulfill their obligations under those conventions. So it is all well and good to say they'll have policemen at every street corner. That's impossible to start with. And of course, it suggests to us that there's no intention to enforce such a ridiculous plan. I don't know any country that threatens or promises to put policemen on every street corner to start with. But what we're speaking about is looking at those plans, because those plans sometimes are developed along the lines of what we call best practice, international best practice. So I wouldn't throw the plans through the window, but what I would call on the government to do is ensure that the plans are realistic and that they are enforced in practice, and we're not seeing that. As I said earlier, a few minutes ago, there are enough laws, and I would even go so far as to say there are enough plans. What we need is careful enforcement. If the police force has got a situation in which their own assistant commissioner, their own constables are being killed on the road, it must be a wake-up call for them to take closer interest in in road traffic, and they must be able to come to the Ministry of Home Affairs and let the Ministry of Home Affairs, the Ministry of Public Works, and all others, the Ministry of Health, sit down together and plan how they're going to enforce these strategies that they have on paper. Because the road structure is part of the problem. Right now, there are over 80,000 vehicles in Guyana. And as you can see from the licensing pattern, that, thousands of vehicles are being added to the streets every year. Some of those vehicles are defective. They're used as second-hand vehicles, and the roads are inadequate. Sometimes it takes a long time to find parking space because there's so many vehicles around. So we need to see traffic safety, road safety, as part of a dynamic process. It's not a static process that something happened in 2000 or 2005. There are changes all the time. There are more vehicles on the roads. There's greater congestion. People have easier access to drink. There are fewer policemen in certain areas, and when you look at the roads themselves, particularly some of the rural roads, you still see people driving paddy on the roadside. You still see vendors coming very close to the edge. You see sometimes a building going up there, and huge piles of sand and rubble are the side of the roads. And sometimes you're driving along there and some people plow into the sand. It's very unsafe. There's very, very little enforcement. And I think those ministries, the Ministry of Home Affairs, the Ministry of Public Works, the Ministry of Health perhaps, need to come together and plan a strategy. My concern is that Guyanese road users must be safe. They must not feel that when they go out there they're likely to be killed or they're likely to be injured. So it's not happening now, and I think better could be done with coordination within the government system.
Okay, sir. I know, being the leader of the opposition, every year we have the budget being presented in the National Assembly. But if you really take a closer look at what is presented, little or no emphasis at all is being placed on our roads and the fatalities that we as Guyanese experience. Do you have any recommendation to this government, perhaps in future budgets to come, that they need to probably look at possible ways or avenues in probably incorporating something into the budget that would more or less address this whole carnage on our roadways?
Well, the plans are there. As you mentioned, there's a United Nations decade for road safety, and the outlines are quite clear. And there's a national plan. The National Road Safety Association has drafted a plan under the guidance of the United Nations. So the plans are there. I do not know if there is necessarily going to be a budgetary implication, but we are going to support that. Our problem is that the Ministry of Home Affairs over the last 7 years has been so weak that whatever plan you seem to give them or whatever plan they come up with suffers from a lack of enforcement, and that is our problem with the Ministry of Home Affairs. They've got a national drug strategy plan, but everybody knows narco trafficking still flourishes. There's a plan to deal with security sector reform, but everybody knows that the police force is far from being reformed. So when we speak about road traffic or road safety, yes, the plans are there. And in the National Assembly, we will continue to press for greater attention to road safety. If there's a budgetary implication, we'll have to look at those budgetary implications. But right now, I am sure that we can use our existing resources to achieve a higher level of enforcement. Inspection of vehicles, breathalyzer tests, measures to reduce speeding, measures to reduce congestion, measures to ensure that persons who are victims of accidents, who've been injured in accidents are removed from the scene. all of these things do not require a whole new budget. What they require is an enforcement of existing laws and the management of existing resources. The resources are there. But rather than have policemen flitting around Starbuck Square, put them on Homestretch Avenue, put them on the West Berbice Road, where they're needed. That's the problem. It's the misuse of resources that we're concerned about, not the absence of resources.
Yes, sir. I know that the Ministry of Home Affairs some years ago more or less had a lot of these CCTV cameras, installed at strategic points in Georgetown here. But apart, it seems as though that these equipment are not properly in use, because we don't
know
okay.
what they're used for.
Yes.
Because I saw one. I think the first one established in Georgia was outside my house. I have no doubt what it's used for. I do believe that you're onto something good here. That if they were used in a more positive way for traffic control, they could learn lessons. But the question is, and we've raised this question, the press has raised the question, nobody knows what goes on with these CCTVs, because, you've got a whole lot of footage, and nobody knows whether the footage is being analyzed and whether the law enforcement authorities are learning anything from the footage, whether it's going to be used for criminal purposes, to pursue criminals, or whether for traffic control, or what. So nobody knows. And you've asked a good question, that certainly in areas where there are lots of accidents, those cameras could be used in order to improve safety. But I don't see any evidence of the use, quite frankly.
Yes, because, as a driver, I was proceeding north to south on Sheriff Street there. And just at the junction of Sheriff and the Homestretch Highway there, there is a traffic light. There is traffic lights at that junction. And what I recognized last week is that a minibus driver, 40th route, rather than him stopping at the traffic light, you know what he did?
Well, you're quite right. You're quite right. The lights, the cameras are probably not being used for enforcement, because I'm aware of some jurisdictions in which the moment you commit a traffic offense, a record is made and your vehicle is identified, the registered owner is identified, and he can get a ticket by the mail or some other means. So you're quite right that enough use is not being made of them. And if you're going to have them at all, might as well use them. And let's use them to save lives. Because when you're speaking about 100 people being killed a year, we certainly need to use whatever resources and equipment we have to save lives.
Okay, I know, for instance, I can attest for one country, that is Suriname. In Suriname, you have a part where there is a part for the pedestrian and cyclist.
Well, so when we speak about road safety, we're looking at the safety, human safety as well. And one of the problems in some areas is that pedestrians, and the pedestrians are some of the victims, or the greatest number of victims of traffic accidents, have nowhere to walk. Sometimes the pedestrian crossings are not illuminated. But in Guyana, particularly in that what I call the accident alley between Houston and say Bagotstung, many children they're sent to the shops, they're unescorted, they go to school, and they try to dodge the traffic, and the traffic is going there at a pace. So when I don't know, well, many countries in the world are safer than Guyana, so you can compare Guyana with any other country. But you need safe pavements or sidewalks. You need proper illuminated pedestrian crossings. We need to understand that if pedestrians are some of the main victims of accidents, We need to direct our attention to protecting people. And this, the whole concept of road safety, that our main aim is not to facilitate speeding cars, is not to allow vehicles to park. It is to make sure that road users are safe. And once you start with that concept, safety first, many things will follow. That you'll put better lighting, you'll put better sidewalks, you'll have more policemen. So you can make a comparison with Guyana with any other state, and I think you'll always win. Because I think the level of enforcement, the level of safety, far too low in this country.
Well said, sir. I know that the APNU, sometime in June of this year, would have made a call to the government to more or less calling on them to ensure that proper safety on our roads are made. But since that call, I would not have seen anything coming from the Ministry of Home Affairs or the Guyana Police Force, you know what I mean?
Don't hold your breath. Don't hold your breath.
Adhering to the call.
As far as law enforcement is concerned, as far as human security and human safety are concerned, we know the problem and we have to keep the pressure up. There is a problem in the Ministry of Home Affairs. I'm not going to run away from that. And it is a matter that we have dealt with in the National Assembly, and better could be done. And we have, as parliamentarians, we have an obligation to maintain the pressure by ensuring that motions are passed, that protests are made, and that the government is made to understand its obligation to the people of this country. This is nothing ornamental. This is human life. That is why we are bringing these measures. And it is quite clear that the police force is not enforcing the law as it should as far as traffic is concerned. The Ministry of Home Affairs is not promulgating measures and programs in order to save life. So it is a governmental problem. It is a police force problem. But I don't think we'll see better on the present management. We have to keep the pressure up there.
Okay, sir. Can I press a little further? I know that before the last sitting, just before we went into recess, you would have moved a number of, or tabled a number of motions. Can I ask whether the APNU in this new sitting would more or less craft a motion to address this growing or this scourge in our society as it regards to road fatalities?
Definitely, it is an area of concern. We have taken position in the partnership not to indulge in any conversations with the Minister of Home Affairs, Mr. Clement Roy, simply because we do not have confidence in his ability to discharge his function of his office. But as far as possible, we are going to bring these matters to the attention of the National Assembly and call for better to be done. And we feel that eventually, sooner, I hope, rather than later, we will make Guyana a safer place. We'll make our roads safer for our children and motorists and bicyclists who are dying in large numbers.
This has been another edition of The Public Interest.